Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast this week. I'm super excited to have a conversation with Sam Kotadia today. Sam is a Chartered Sports Psychologist. He's worked with high-profile football clubs such as Colchester FC and currently Wrexham AFC. He also oversees the flagship programme of Empire Fighting Chance, a Bristol-based charity. Sam developed a non-contact boxing programme to help disengaged young people understand resilience and their mind, and they work with 5,000 young people per year. We have a conversation about Sam's ideas about the mind, how he works with elite sports people and young people, and what his approach is like. I hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast this week, and I'm thrilled to welcome on Sam Kotadia. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Good to be here.
So, Sam, I hope that we can talk today about your work as a sports psychologist, working with both elite athletes in the football world and young people in the boxing world. I hope that we can talk about your ideas of the mind and how you use these in your work with those groups. But first, to kick off, something that we like to try and explore a little on the podcast is people's journeys to where they are. And in particular with you, I think a lot of our listeners will be really interested to know how you entered the world of sports psychology, as it's certainly something that a lot of students that I come across ask me about. Could you tell us a bit about how you came to be where you are?
Of course. I think in my teenage years, I was always a lover of sport and a big fan of the Rocky films. And when I look back to why I loved those films, I think they just captured something special about the underdog mentality and the human spirit and having to face adversity and rise to the challenge. And I think that started me off on my journey. And even when I was studying English literature at A-levels, I was drawn to some of the sort of the tragic plays of Shakespeare where the main characters would have to overcome setbacks and sort of rise to the challenge and really dig deep into their spirit to learn, to grow. And that made me explore wanting to study psychology in a more formal way. And I did my undergraduate degree in psychology, and still with that kind of love of sport in the background, I specialized in sports psychology. So how did I do that? When I graduated, I approached a football club called Colchester United. This was back in 2003, I think. Yeah, when I graduated, 20 years ago. And I offered my services for free. I wanted to see if I could apply what I've been learning as a budding psychologist in the sort of the arena of life in a real sort of pressured situation where athletes are given such a small window of opportunity to get it right, and started to test some ideas out and worked in the youth team first, and they performed well. They won their league, and I felt like I had a voice at that time that contributed to that success. And fortunately, I then got invited to work with the first team. And the manager at the time was Phil Parkinson, and really put some faith in me and what I wanted to bring to the table. And again, the first team had some great successes. A couple of years on, we got promoted to the Championship League, and again, psychology played a part in the culture and contributed to team success. And it also gave me 3 years of applied practice, which meant I could go on and get my charter with the British Psychological Society. I had a supervisor at the time when I graduated from Essex University, and paved the way for me to be able to share important knowledge in something that I love, in a space that I love. So I feel really lucky with that. And as I'm sure we'll go on to explore, I definitely feel like my application of psychology has really evolved from perhaps starting out with quite an academic mind, wanting to acquire new approaches and new models, to now a simplified approach towards mind. And I feel like, certainly in my own life and my sort of professional practice, it's really showing some benefit, quite profound results, really.
Can you tell me about that evolution? What did you notice happen as your practice grew?
I came into being a psychologist thinking that I could carry around this toolkit of methods and strategies and techniques to take a client from perhaps a place where they're struggling to somewhere where they now feel fulfilled, they feel motivated, they feel confident, and now they're getting more from their endeavors. And I think at the time I was quite sort of mesmerized by this world of self-help books and neuro-linguistic programming, where you could, reconstruct thoughts and visualize what you want. And, it made perfect sense. But I had to be honest, I think it's sort of 10 years on, certainly when I arrived in my sort of early 30s, I just felt like these results are short-lived. I always felt like clients would get a quick hit and like, great, I feel better, but then would almost slip back into old habits and old thinking patterns. And I'll give you an example of one athlete who I worked with at Sheffield Wednesday. Worked with him for 7 years, and we ended up publishing a book together, which was just a paid testament to the relationship that we had, and we just loved exploring these matters. And Jose Samido and I remember one of our conversations that we had. There was a realization that although tips and strategies and techniques to perhaps create a positive mindset might have had a quick hit, again, we realized they were short-lived. And we also realized, and this is probably a real like sort of turnkey moment, was that there was no relationship between how Jose felt and how he performed. Now, I remember countless games where he'd go in feeling nervous and come out man of the match. And I also remember countless games where he would be feeling really confident and up for it, and it'd be a disaster. And it invited an exploration, actually. Well, then what can create a more consistent performance? And I think through the conversations and his application of psychology, we realized that when he didn't mind the feelings associated with anxiety, when he didn't mind feeling a little frustrated perhaps, or whatever was arising, then he had more headspace and more clarity to perform. So instead of sort of getting seduced by an amazing feeling or having this deep desire to get away from that negative feeling, there was almost like a neutral position of awareness that however I'm feeling, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic at times, but you know what? It's okay. These thoughts and feelings and emotions, they come, they go, they move on. And by tapping into a sort of visceral sense of flow, the natural order of experience, then more flow, more instinct, more expression, more energy showed up on the football pitch. But any attempt to try and push away feelings that weren't welcome or perceived to be not welcome, and nice kind of excitable feelings, there's trying to manage and manipulate that inner world only took away from this performance. It was the deep acceptance of all feelings as if I have chosen them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's when, I saw him create those consistent performances without any real conscious psychological effort. So that's how it's simplified. I feel like I've moved away from providing solutions and techniques and fixes to a deeper acceptance and an understanding of the mind, an education of the mind, as opposed to trying to create desirable states.
How do you start to do that now? How do you introduce that idea to an athlete? Again, if we start perhaps with the football world.
Most athletes that I believe come to see a sports psychologist, usually it starts from a position that they want to feel better. And pretty much 10 times out of 10, athletes who are feeling like they're in the slump are because they're trying to be their own psychologist. They're trying everything to get their heads in the right space. So often that conversation opens up where they have a self-reflection of the cognitive energy to try and get that headspace right. And I think when they reflect on, the utility and the value of that, they kind of realize that, wow, it really was quite a waste of energy. And immediately see a palpable relief show up that perhaps I don't need to head in that direction. So I always start by trying to build awareness around this understanding of mind. And I also explain how I operate as a sports psychologist. I say, this is what I want to bring to the table for athletes. I don't want to be someone who provides a solution or an intervention, but to help the athlete gain a direct experience, a deeper understanding of their direct experience off the pitch and on the pitch. And 10 times out of 10, the resistance and the stress and the suffering always is coming from that individual trying to be somewhere that they're not. They might be off thinking about the future or the past, or investing a lot of energy trying to manage, control, and manipulate their direct experience into a better one. It always seems to boil down to that. The stories and the narratives are infinitely different, but the underlying principle is the same, and that's how I would start, is to help athletes get a sense of what is not working.
Mm. So it sounds like you're kind of veering away from ideas that are quite prominent, for instance, in cognitive behavioral therapy, where you would work with someone to challenge thoughts or restructure them. It sounds like you're bypassing those steps and just saying, let's just be with what we've got, but not try to change it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think a sort of, again, a sort of anecdotal evidence of this phenomena is an athlete in the zone, or any artist in the zone for that matter. There is a loss of self. Csikszentmihalyi's definitions of the zone, and there's great bodies of research around his exploration of the zone. Qualities of the descriptions of the zone are this effortlessness, this lack of will, this lack of trying. I've never met an athlete that has provided an account where they've said, yeah, I really worked hard on my thoughts out there today, had got the right ones, and then started scoring. But, it may happen, but I can only talk from my applied experience, is that it's the not taking the bait of these feelings and going into deep conversations with them that provides space. And what are those qualities of space? From what I see, a flow and spaciousness, effortlessness, and a deep sense of peace and happiness that seem to arise when we're not kind of mesmerized by our constant changing thoughts, But I'll also add, I again, why I feel joyed that things have simplified in my work is that there's a danger I see, especially in my work with Empire Fighting Chance at the boxing gym. So charity helps young people face trauma and face those uncomfortable thoughts in a sporting way, is that it's so easy if we work really hard to try and change those thoughts and they come back. It's possible that a new cognition arises that, wow, I must be really damaged here. There must be something seriously wrong with me here, but I need to now perhaps intensify my approach to sorting these thoughts out, which again compounds what I've seen, a misunderstanding about how mind should be held.
So having, I guess, established those maybe boundaries or even that base on which you're going to be working, how do you proceed over? Would you tend to work with? We'll obviously come to speak about the boxing, but thinking about the football world, would you work over a period of time? Do you tend to introduce these things to an individual? Do you tend to work more on a team basis? What's your approach?
Very relaxed. I think if you say, right, we need 10 sessions to address this, then I feel like there's an implicit expectation that I'm taking that athlete somewhere. So the way I open it up is I always say, have these conversations with me over a coffee or one-to-one basis. Let's explore, let's discuss, but only do it if there's a deep curiosity and there's a genuine intrinsic interest, rather than what can I extract from it. I would say that's my perhaps number one ethic, if you will, because again, I'm not going to be there forever. I might be there for 1 session, 5 sessions. So it's like, if there can be a facilitation around an exploration, around performance, around, the psychology of performing at our best, great. And if you're interested in it, great. And usually you can tell, like I've had players where we've spoken for 2 hours and it felt like it's only been 10 minutes, so I get a sense of this timeless quality where you're sort of locked in with each other, exploring it, and the conversation just flows. And what I see is like insights just arise, these, oh yeah, moments, oh, that will explain that, or, oh yeah, and yeah, that I was really I was doing my pre-match routine and my positive self-talk, and before I even got on the football pitch, I was exhausted, and oh yeah, for the last 6 years, I've been trying to get myself in the right headspace, and I've been working so hard on my mentality, but I just keep going backwards. I keep going downhill and drifting out of the league. So all these oh yeah moments arise, and oh yeah, when I was playing at my best, that I wasn't consciously applying, material techniques. I was there, I was present, I was in my senses. That I got a taste of that flow, and I didn't do anything. It sort of snuck up on me. And another oh yeah moment would be, this is how crafty the mind is. I had a player where he had an absolutely amazing game, was in the zone, and then the mind goes, right, what did I do to create that zone-like performance? Yeah. So he started to consciously look at all the elements, and then the next game it was a disaster because he was so conscious. So he was trying to turn what was a natural instinctive thing into a very deliberate approach. So I know I've sort of rambled a bit there, but I do try to keep the conversations flowing and relaxed. And I only want to keep them going if I genuinely feel the athlete's interested to explore, as opposed to a deep need to get some kind of fix. That's not, I guess, how my practice works now. And on a sort of team level, again, these principles find their way into the dressing room. So, in the same vein of form, if I'm trying to get athletes into the right headspace, if I'm saying, right, guys, we need to be more confident, there's a logical implication that everyone in that room is not confident. If I'm telling everybody just relax, then we all know that we tense up when we consciously try to relax. So it's subtly working on the environment through the coaches to get the language right, to make it about the craft of football and trying to keep the mental side away from the conversation of football. That way, the mind can naturally relax and resolve itself, which I think it does when we don't give our thoughts too much attention. They naturally move on. But I wouldn't address the team. I'd work subtly through this sort of educational based approach through the coaches, and look at how we design and shape that culture to support this underlying philosophy.
And how do you think that that kind of approach complements or differs, or how does it meld, I guess, with the more I guess just from when we see football on TV, like live games, and we sort of see managers I guess just shouting at their players. Like I follow Arsenal, so you sort of see the kind of managers like hyping up on the sidelines, which I guess is a slightly more maybe aggressive motivational approach. How do those things gel? Because I guess they, on the face of them, feel different, but
Great question. I think that if we square it up again to this approach, we're not saying there's a right or wrong. It's more about where these feelings are coming from. It's like, if I'm transmitting my message from a position of desperation, then I think that that's unhealthy. So, I guess you could look at the difference between assertiveness and aggression. It's like, I think players pick up on when someone's desperate. And so you can F and blind from a place of clarity, and you can F and blind from a place of desperation. So advice I would give to practitioners or coaches is check in where that expression is coming from. If in our own space there's real turmoil and tension, stay with the feeling, let the dust settle. And if you still want to F and blind, fine, because it's going to come from a more stable position of clarity. So I think on the face of it, it can look negative, but I think what I see is that, Sir Alex Ferguson, for example, I think, he was very, very assertive. Some may say aggressive, but why did all the players respect him? Well, I think probably because it came from a good place. There was a quality behind that. There was a care, there was a love. How that care and love expresses itself through us is going to be different from everybody. But I do think the players are going to pick up whether it's coming from, a solid place or a slightly desperate place.
To move this to think about how you would work with young people, I guess I'm curious about what are the similarities, what are the differences in your approach between elite athletes and then young people who you work through with your charity?
Young people get this quicker. It's like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I think you're certainly myself. I still struggle with this approach because my mind wants to say it can't be that simple. So I think young people intuitively get it. I think elite athletes often have a little bit more walking back to this philosophy of simplicity and flow. The message doesn't really change. Again, those principles of nurturing a curiosity and an interest, as opposed to, presenting or packaging this as the ultimate fix. So I think that stays consistent. So yeah, very much the same. Um, I think it's easier with young people than elite athletes in many ways. I think these conversations could end quite quickly if they just get it far quicker than an elite athlete. I think often.
What what is it that made you think about boxing and young people, or I guess where did the idea come from?
So yeah, just to set the scene with Empire Fighting Chance. I'd been doing some work with Bristol Boxing and some of their pro athletes, and always knew of the that community there. And about 7-8 years ago, I went for a coffee with the head of Bristol Boxing, Jamie Sanigar, and he told me about this amazing charity where young people who are experiencing difficulties or inequality they'd go to the boxing gym and they'd be assigned a coach or a mentor, and they would just get some headspace on the bags and do some non-contact boxing, so skipping and pad work and bag work and other drills that you would do in the boxing world. And what amazed me was when I heard about this charity, it was like, wow, they're getting amazing results and no one is actually doing anything special. I'm like, great, this is a place I'd love to get involved with. And so I talked to Jamie and I said, look, do you know what? I could make your program a little bit more robust with kind of an informed theory of change and approach to the mind. And so I was commissioned to write a program called Box Champions, which delivers and shares important knowledge about the mind all into this, packaged into sort of non-contact boxing over 20 weeks. And the program carries two important design elements. Number one, we're bringing in this important knowledge of mind into the boxing gym. So the mentor and the coach is sharing this knowledge when the kids are on the bags or they're having a break, as opposed to in a office clinical environment. So I thought, brilliant. Let's get the great work taking place in the boxing gym, because the endorphins are flowing, learning states are activated, and the guard quite literally is lowered, and there's a great exploration with the coach and the young person. Number two, which I was absolutely delighted to sort of have the license to pioneer in a more formal way. Again, our impact's been evaluated by the University of Manchester, and quite robust, high level measurement. Not my cup of tea, but important. And where I felt we're getting results was the design of the program doesn't try to fix the young people, again, like what we touched on in the Box Champions program. It provides knowledge about the mind, the importance of stepping into fear, not pushing it away, the knowledge that growth mindset, that we can develop new skills and improve, that there are no fundamentally wrong feelings. And 7 years on, the program stood the test of time, and you see the young people's eyes light up because they have been moved from pillar to post from a lot of clinical environments, and for whatever reason that hasn't suited them, and they found their way into a slightly non-conventional environment where they can play, they can be themselves, and they're also getting these few gems about the mind during their time. So yeah, I feel very privileged to have, and I'm still actively part of that journey. Now we train other community organizations to deliver the same program. So I think we reach about 5,000 young people a year. I don't directly work with the young people, but I inform the coaches to deploy the program.
I'm just really curious about how it works, and I want to understand it better. So you say it might be in the breaks, it might be during the boxing. So is it fairly clear that the coach is imparting knowledge, or is it through a general conversation, they might put in some nuggets. I'm struggling to formulate the question, but like what does it look like?
No, it's spot on. Like, it's good question, and we get this question a lot because it's so important when people are trying to get their heads around it. It's a mixture. Sometimes a coach might say, right, the theme of the session is feel the fit. When we push our fears away, actually they come back stronger. So the little theme running through the session is going to be, let's hold our ground in those feelings we're trying to avoid. Let's see them, give them a bit of airtime. And then they'll go into maybe some skipping, some pad work that the coach has constructed. And I think the beauty of the sort of boxing sport is that you've got 3 minutes of activity, and then so you got the buzzer going, and then you got 1 minute break. So in that 1 minute break, that's when these sort of general conversations can open out. Now, coaches will often say to me, look, I couldn't start with, right, today is the theme. It didn't work like that. And as you alluded to, sometimes these principles arise in conversation. And let's say, for example, a young person is really unhappy, and then they're enjoying themselves on the bag. And the coach might say, how can you say you're unhappy? Look at you smiling, and they were like, oh yeah. And then that could open up a conversation around growth mindset, that our limiting beliefs and ideas about ourselves aren't necessarily true. And, that then throughout the course of those sessions, it might be that one point that just the young person's constantly reminded of, in not too much of an imposing way, but in a gentle way. And with a bit of luck, you then see them re-engage with school or meet their difficulties with a slightly new mindset or a new way of holding it. But most of the time, to be honest, it arises through those organic moments when the coach is connected with the young person and they're talking.
And what do they... So you said that young people tend to get their head around these ideas faster than I guess probably older people or the elite athletes. Like, what do they... Is there ever doubt, or do young people take it seriously? Can coaches struggle to get them to take it seriously?
It all depends on the young person. Like, again, at Empire, some of the young people are experiencing quite sort of profound difficulties. So it does vary, but I think if you were to take, again, young person and an elite athlete, I think that it's the simplicity, this idea of simplicity, of being aware as opposed to being smart. I think as we progress, it feels like I need to acquire more knowledge. And, I feel like certainly in my space and my service to people who I work with, is actually trying to remove all that information sometimes and come back to a bit of clarity. So young people are closer to that essential knowing. And I think when we're embedded in our intellect and our ideas about ourselves and our individuals, sometimes it is a little stickier to walk back from that, because, talking core psychology, you've got your, it's a confirmation bias. I think you hold on to what you see based on your beliefs. So your whole decision-making realm is funneled towards what you've invested your time in. And it feels very destructive. And I think the human mind is very loss averse. We want to hold on, we want to conserve. And, Kahneman's research around that, in relation to an elite athlete that has to let go of stuff, you're probably going to get more yeah buts because of that loss aversion. Like, oh, hang on a minute, I've invested 3 years of buying every self-help book under the sun. Surely one of them's going to be good. It's probably might be a bit harder to consider or invite the idea that perhaps I was looking in the wrong direction.
Mm. Yeah, it's exactly that. Yeah, but sort of moments that I guess I'm wondering about, because the I meet young people at work in often in an emergency, in a crisis setting, often in A&E, and the I guess the skepticism with which they will often meet clinical professionals, and as you say, a lot of the young people that you meet through the boxing world or the programs that you create have often not found the right place within the clinical world. But so it's interesting to think about how to make those situations work in a different way, like what we could do differently, even in an emergency crisis clinical setting.
Yeah, it reminds me of a seminar I did for it's an NHS trust, and it was the department focused on heart failure, and it's quite interesting. I brought this approach to the table, not looking. I think they were expecting lots of tips and strategies, but again, became an exploration of how actually, and this was validated from some of the the nurses and doctors' direct experience. That when we try to get someone in a calmer state, we actually agitate them more. Because if I'm saying just stay calm, I'm probably creating, oh, something really must be wrong here if I've got to stay calm. And then the trying not to be anxious, I think can rev up that experience of panic. And I think there's parallels there between a dressing room in a football club where I'm now like, come on, guys, we've got to be more confident. That can suddenly, again, jack up the arousal levels and tip over into a sort of, a panic state where we're not seeing things clearly. So I guess on the front line, like where you have to operate and you need to take action, there might be, and I don't know, there might be something around the language but also the understanding of our own direct experience. If I'm in a heightened state and I'm trying really hard not to calm myself down, then that's gonna transmit on to my patient, I think. But if I'm comfortable with my own tensions and anxiety and I can hold my line with them without knee jerking off them, then there's a good conversation to be had whether or not that would help the patient and will make clearer and quicker decisions.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think tricky to both keep those things in mind, but I guess also just to strip back to only those things. I guess the things that get in the way of being that way is all the extra processing that we build up as we grow up.
What I've noticed in myself when I get anxious and my mind's busy, and then I try to apply this approach to my thinking, I'm doing another thing to get away from it. And I catch myself all the time. But what helps me, and I think, this is sort of comes back to me as well from people who I work with, is when they're just aware that the mind is busy, that they've taken that position of awareness, or I know it's becoming more popular, sort of the use of mindfulness. When I take that position of the observer and I just hold and I notice, then those tensions don't become so intense. There's a slight let's say disconnect, because you're welcoming them all, but you're not, your personal identity isn't wrapped up in them. You're not going toe to toe with these forced feelings and emotions. I've got to be like this, I've got to be like that, I've got to like off in a conceptual world. That when we just hold and take the position of awareness, then somehow they relieve themselves. I always get, just on that note, someone will say, "What do you mean, Sam? Just accept it." And I like, it is acceptance, but we've also got to be really careful with acceptance, because often if we're feeling really sad or we're not happy and we start to apply acceptance, we're now applying acceptance not to feel happy, not to feel sad. So it's not actually acceptance. I think there's a philosopher, I guess you could say he's, brings psychology into what he talks about, and a guy called Rupert Spira. And I really love his definition of acceptance. It's like, if this feeling was here forever, I'm okay with that. And I really like that sentiment, because it's like, no, it's okay to feel these feelings. It's okay. Yeah, I don't need to get clever with trying to duck and dive here. These feelings are there. Let's let them be there as if we've chosen them. And I really like that sentiment of deep acceptance. And I think there's a real quality there that helps people.
How, and I think you're talking around this, but how do you explain to people the idea of acceptance, I guess, sort of versus resignation? Or again, I guess thinking about people living in the young people that you talk to living in bad situations, that one can have acceptance while still aiming for something better.
Absolutely. I think good thing to address, like, it's so important that this approach doesn't dismiss what's happening to people and the profound suffering that's happening to people in the world. And then, we're certainly not saying the experience of depression or the experience of schizophrenia isn't there. And we have to be very careful with that and be respectful. So operationally, I like, again, I was related to sport. I try to put a line down the middle. Operationally, there are things that need to be addressed. Like, if you're in danger, I need some money, I need to get a job. Those things, I think Empire are brilliant at, will point towards right careers and support in every way we can in an operational way. Now, what we try not to do is make it a psychological issue. The young person has the qualities and the assets to go and thrive and make positive changes, but we never hold them in a way like, when you've got over this anxiety or when you've got past this feeling, you're going to be able to do all these amazing things. We also don't do this. We don't say, it's one of the principles actually in the program. We call it the happiness myth. This idea that, and this is my sometimes challenge with solution-based therapy, is like, it's like, yeah, when I get that dream job, or when I've solved this problem, now I'm going to be happier. And no, you're still going to be you, but actually slightly disheartened, because you're still going to be there, just in a new scenario. I see it with athletes. So when I become heavyweight champion of the world, then I will be happy. Tyson Fury is a great example of that, where he, went into quite a cycle from during that period after he beat Klitschko, and I think that it plays a part when we load on these expectations that when somehow I've got this feeling, or when I've got this dream house, or when I've got this perfect job, then I'm going to be happier. It actually it can add a pressure. And then when a young person arrives there and there's still these storms and these feelings, it's like, wow, okay, that's not cool. So we make sure, we try to, certainly, and I do this in, with professional athletes, make sure that you can address things operationally and practically about how to navigate this world more skillfully, but we really try not to make it a psychological issue.
Coming back to the idea of flow, which I guess has been the thread throughout what you've talked about, what What's flow like? What is flow? What is it that happens when you strip everything back?
Common definitions that are quite well respected in academia is a sense of being completely immersed in the task in hand, being in your senses. So it's a deep commitment to now, like, just a simple exercise now for, like, your listeners, like, what is my experience right now? What is it made up of? So you've got hearing, sensing, seeing, touching. There's a sensory experience there. So the flow is very much seeing reality for what it is, not through top-down concepts, but through a direct connection with your senses. And when we're attuned to that, then flow, I believe, is an apparent. It's not a destination. It's not a place. It's not a thing we can go and engineer. That is always there, like touching, feeling, sensing. The ings. It's happening now. We can all appreciate that. I hope so. If we turn inwards, away from a little bit away from our belief systems and ideas that we've accumulated to, well, what can we describe right now? And that, I guess, is quite a practical way of trying to meet flow. So I think it's not so much about what flow is, but what flow isn't. Because when we stop looking for it, it might surprise us and show up. So it's sort of a placeless place that I've never seen an athlete work really hard at finding flow and do it well. And in some ways, flow shows up when we stop looking for it. That's again what I see all the time. Just enjoying what we're doing, like, again, I think I can imagine young people who engage in art therapy that are just deeply enjoying painting and exploring that creative process, that we get a taste of flow. And all the greats through time, like Cézanne and Monet, they taught, there's a really good quote from Cézanne that's, when he was painting nature, and he just said, nature and what I'm painting is experience is always changing. It's dynamic, it's buzzy, it's constantly moving and flowing. But also there's a thrill of permanence about nature. So it's a bit of a paradox. It's like it's always there, but it's always moving at the same time. And there's a quality there of being aware of flow, but not getting lost in it, just having an awareness and seeing what's unfolding without getting too wrapped up into stories and ideas.
Amazing. I may say that is probably a perfect place for us to draw towards our end, and hopefully things for people to take away and to consider how they might find those places in their daily life, because it sounds like it's something that doesn't have to be just reserved for either sports or arts people. It can be available to all.
It's an underlying central exploration there. Everyone is included in that. That's the special quality, I think, which is why I love exploring this and talking about this, instead of seeing difference, in ourselves and other people. There's something deeper, more profound that that connects us all. And I would invite people to explore some of the the works around Buddhism and sort of ancient spirituality that really has stood the test of time. And there's some real gems there that make the complex world we live in a little bit more graceful and easier, and all of us can explore in that. The conversation is no different. They're just different. They're just different contexts. essential exploration in this is the same.
Nice. Sam, if people want to learn more from you or follow your ideas, or indeed if someone's thinking about a young person that they know who might benefit from the boxing program, where would you send people to look for those different things?
If you go to samkotadia.com, that's my kind of performance page, and there's an email address there. Or if in your communications you want to leave an email address, that might be the simplest way, and just drop me a line. Again, this is a pleasure for me to talk about this stuff. I always feel like it deepens my understanding, and I think the way we've conducted this is all, again, a little mirror of a conversation with an athlete or a young person. It's an exploration without any position taken, just an open mind and an open heart to explore.
Sam, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I hope that we can have another conversation in future, because it's been fascinating, and it'd be great to see where your work goes and where your ideas are about the mind in another 10, 20 years.
Brilliant. Yeah, be a pleasure.